Hey there. Welcome back to our channel. Today we're diving into the deep waters of philosophy as we react to some captivating theories about why humans are inherently religious by the American theologian R.C. Sproul. From the musings of Feuerbach to the insights of Marx and Freud, we're exploring the complex interplay between psychology, society, and spirituality. Let's jump right into it.
So the question most of the able atheists of the 19th century were addressing was this question: since there is no God, why is it that man seems to be incurably homo religiosus? Everywhere we go, whatever culture we examine, we find evidence and manifestation of some form of religious expression and religious belief that is deeply rooted in the culture. And it's not something that is limited to or contained within the confines of primitive, ignorant people. We find people profoundly intelligent who are as vehement in their affirmation of the existence of God as the atheists were in their denial. And they said, how can we account for that? Now, let me just pause for a second and see what was already appearing as the beginning of a philosophy of phenomenology. The question was not one of metaphysics, is there a God? We can't get up and climb up and beyond the realm of physics and penetrate those questions. What we need to know is, in the arena we can investigate this world. Not only can we investigate the forces of physics in this world and of chemistry and of biology, we can also examine anthropology. We can examine people. And one of the things we can do is that we can see that people here, one of the phenomenon that we see is that they tend to be religious. So we ask, why? We need to account for it. Just as a scientist in his laboratory has to give some kind of sufficient or efficient causal explanation for the data that he examines, so these historians of thought were trying to come up with a causal explanation for the advent of religion. And ladies and gentlemen, virtually every one of these people came up with some explanation rooted and grounded in psychology. Feuerbach, he noticed, for example, that no matter what culture he examined, the cultural expressions of their religion tended to depict gods that looked like mirror images of the people themselves. That if they went to an Aborigine native in Australia, their deity looked like an Australian Aborigine rode around in a canoe. If they went to an outpost in Alaska, they would find that their deity was described to look like an Eskimo. And it seems that the people began to create God in their own image rather than understand themselves being created in God's image. And so Feuerbach said, all that God is in our concept is a projection of human characteristics elevated to the super or to the nth degree, sort of as a cosmic Superman. We understand power as a human trait. We just absolutize that, and we say God is omnipotent, all-powerful. We understand that human beings are capable of knowledge. They have science. We raise that to the nth degree and say God is a being who is omniscient. He has all knowledge, and so on. Karl Marx, as you well know, sought an economic explanation for the advent of religion. He said that the history of mankind is basically the history of the conflict of economic clashes between economic groups and so on. And he says in any world, in any society, those who control the wealth will always be in a minority, and the poor will always be in a majority. And the problem that the wealthy have is simple. how are we going to control the masses? How are we going to stop the masses from rising up in rebellion, attacking us, and taking the wealth and distributing it equally among themselves? And Marx says the way, the twofold way that the wealthy control the masses are these. On the one hand, the wealthy control the legislation, so that Lady Justice removes her blindfold, according to Marx, and the law begins to reflect the vested interests of the ruling classes. The law will discriminate against certain groups who are not in power. He said that will happen. He said, but the most important tool that the owner has to control the slave, that the rich have to control the poor, is the tool of religion. Because what religion does is that it promises to the poor a better life in heaven, on the other side of the Jordan. If they be good slaves now and behave themselves on the plantation, then someday, by and by, swing down sweet chariot, or however that goes, and they're going to get carried away home to the other side of Jordan, and everything's going to be great. But in the meantime, they have to be humble, and they have to work, and they have to mind their own business, and they have to behave themselves, while the rich man enjoys all of the wealth here and now. So you put them to sleep with drugs of religion. That's the theory. Freud, of course, had more than one explanation, but his basic explanation was that man is afraid of nature because we're vulnerable to nature. We can be harmed or killed by the tornado, by the fire, by the flood, by disease. And you can't negotiate with these forces. And so what we do is that we begin to personalize impersonal forces and begin to believe that there's a God that resides in the fire and a God that resides in the flood. And we have a God for this and a God for that. And if we pray to those gods, appease those gods, give homage to those gods, maybe they will treat us kindly and remove the threat of nature from us. Now, again, I don't have time in this brief period to canvass the basic theses here of these different philosophers. But the rudimentary principle is religion is the invention that comes out of some deep-rooted psychological need. I don't need to labor that anymore, do I? I think we've all heard it enough. Now, I want to say this in response. When somebody is accused of a crime in our criminal justice system, it is the task of the prosecution to prove the charges against the accused. And part of the procedure in police work and so on is to discover motive, means, and opportunity. If a person can establish that they had no possible opportunity or no possible means to commit the crime, it's very difficult to prove the crime against them, isn't it? But just because we prove that somebody has the motive, the means, and the opportunity to commit a crime does not mean that the person is guilty. We may be able to show, for example, if one person is murdered, we may be able to find 50 different people that had a motive to kill that person, had the opportunity to kill that person, and had the wherewithal to do it. You need more than that to convict of the crime. I hope we understand that. Now, I have no quarrel with Freud or Marx or Feuerbach or Sartre or Kaufmann or any of this in terms of their making it very clear that human beings indeed do have the capacity to invent religion. I think we have to admit that freely. We have brains, we have the ability to project ideas, we have the ability to project wishes, we have the ability to be engaged in fantasy. We know that. And I think that it's theoretically possible, if there is no God, I think it's possible that people could invent one. We have the motive, we have the means, we have the opportunity. I don't think we'd invent the God of Scripture. I don't think we'd invent a God who's holy. I don't think we'd invent a God who demands perfect obedience to him with the threat of everlasting torment if we fail in that. But that's another story. But I'm granting at the outset that we do have a psychological motive to invent God. But what I'm pleading for in this brief message this evening is to understand two things. That just because man has the ability to invent God does not mean that that's how the idea of God came about. It's also more than possible that the reason why the world is incurably religious is because there is a God who has so clearly and manifestly demonstrated his existence to mankind that knowledge of him is virtually inescapable. That's another alternative explanation. But more important to the point right now is that we have to say to our atheist friends, hold the phone a minute. I'm willing to grant to you that I have a vested interest in believing in God. Are you willing to grant to me that there are also powerful psychological motives that many people have to deny the existence of God? That the worst news that some people I know could ever discover is that there's a God who will hold them accountable for their lives. Because if there is a bias, the bias can be in the other direction. There's a strong reason why I wouldn't want God to exist, namely that if I have sinned, if God exists, then I understand that I am guilty before him and that I am going to be held ultimately accountable. And if that's the way, if I am in a relationship to God that is one of alienation and estrangement and disobedience, then I hope with all of my heart and soul that he doesn't exist. Do we understand that? And now what I'm trying to say is the question of the existence of God can never be resolved on the basis of our psychology. That's a question that we have to deal with on other grounds, on objective grounds of objective philosophical argument, not on the basis of what my psychological disposition is or what your psychological disposition is. I have to say at the outset, yes, I want there to be a God. And if you're going to be honest with me, tell me, and maybe you're saying to me, oh, I do too, R.C. Boy, I really want to believe it. Please persuade me of it. You know, and if that's your disposition, put it on the table. If your disposition is, boy, that's the last thing I hope is true. But the point is, nobody's neutral about this question. I've never met somebody that was neutral. Because there is no neutrality when it comes to moral responsibility, ultimately. And you know what I've noticed in my debates with atheists is that I almost never meet somebody who said, oh, how I wish that were true. And that surprises me, because I can't imagine why any human being wouldn't want it to be true that there is a God who is willing to forgive them of every sin that they've ever committed. A God that will give them life that will go forever. A God that will guarantee to them that everything that takes place in their existence is significant. And there's no such thing as futility in your labor. Maybe what people have is that they're afraid to believe it because it's too good to be true. I mean, they have been disappointed so many times in their lives by believing things that didn't come to pass as they had hoped, that they're almost saying, hey, I don't dare believe that. But usually what I'm engaged with in discussions with atheists is with a spirit of hostility. People seem to be saying, man, that's bad news. Don't talk to me about the existence of God. Now, long before Freud and Marx and Feuerbach and these people ever speculated on the question of the psychology of theism, the Apostle Paul, centuries ago, set forth in his philosophical framework a psychology of atheism. The New Testament gives a rational explanation for why there might be, in fact is, a negative bias deeply rooted in the human heart against the existence of God. And again, I would like to take a few minutes to look at that treatment, which is well known as it is found in the first chapter of Paul's letter to the Romans. Beginning in chapter 1, verse 18, we read this report. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Now,
And that wraps up our philosophical journey into the nature of religion and human belief. Before we sign off, one fascinating idea was the concept that man would not possibly create a holy and righteous God who will bother them with guilty conscience, which is radical reality of the intrinsic actuality of humans' religiosity. It's a profound insight that challenges our understanding of divine attributes and universal human psychology. We hope you've enjoyed exploring these deep questions with us. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more enlightening discussions. Until next time, keep questioning and seeking truth. Thanks for joining us.